Hey everyone, so today I want to talk about star players who are also willing to fight. These are some of my favorite players in the game. These are some of my favorite all-time players. I love this style of play and this kind of player. It's really not as common as it used to be. There used to be, back in the 70s and 80s, it was very common to see someone who was easily a top six forward, 40-point guy, 20 goals, 30 goals, and also have 7, 8, maybe even double-digit fights every single season. But that kind of player is really slowed up. There's not as many of them anymore. It's kind of dying off, and that's really unfortunate because I love these kind of players. The poster child for this kind of player when I was growing up as a kid was Jarome Iginla. Absolutely a perennial 30-goal scorer, someone who was easily the star of the team. He was Calgary's captain. He was one of the biggest stars in the NHL at one point, and he was also very willing to fight and drop the gloves. You don't see players like that very much anymore. You did back in the 70s and 80s. It was very common. Guy that comes to mind is Mark Messier in his Oiler days, especially. A lot of people didn't realize he fought a lot. He would have 7, 8, 9 fights a season while also being the superstar that he was. So nowadays it's not as common, but there are still some guys left that play that style that are like that. I have a list in front of me. I have 17 players on it. These are all guys who I would consider, I may be stretching, I may be being a little generous with the word star, but I'm talking about top 6 forwards or top 4 defensemen. There's only a couple defensemen on the list because a lot of defensemen don't put up the points needed to make this list. But I was looking for top 6 forwards, guys who play top 6 minutes, score top 6 points, and are still getting in multiple fights a year. And the list is fairly short. I have 17 of them for the entire league. That's a lot less than it would have been 10 years ago. That's a lot less, certainly, than it would have been 30 years ago. But also, I'm not talking about fighters or guys who fight who can also play. Then I would have to put guys like Chris Stewart, Tom Wilson, Josh Anderson on the list. Those guys aren't top 6 forwards yet, or at least yet for Anderson. Anderson, I think, will be. The other two, they're not top 6 forwards. Just so if I included guys who fight and can also play hockey decently well, this list would be very long. But I'm looking for star players, top 6 guys who are, consistently 50 plus points, maybe 40 plus points, but consistently putting up good point numbers and fight numbers. So to start, I'm just going to start with the poster child for this style of play left in the NHL. One of the last ones left that play this old school, old-time hockey style of play, Wayne Simmonds in Philadelphia. He's really a throwback. He would have been perfect in the 80s and 90s, but he was born 20, 30 years too late. But he's really the epitome of this kind of player left in the NHL today. He's one of my favorite players in the whole league. I absolutely love this guy. Love the way he plays. So I looked at their points for the last 3 years. I focused on the last 3 years because some guys used to fight and don't anymore. Some guys used to be top 6 forwards but really aren't anymore. So I just focused on the last 3 years, not counting this year because it just started. But Simmonds, 2014-15, 50 points, 4 fights. Next season, 60 points, 5 fights. And then last season, 54 points, 5 fights again. That's really as high a number fight-wise as you're going to see on this list. It's 5. Guys who score don't fight like they used to. Guys in general don't fight like they used to. You used to have guys in the 20 to 30 fight range regularly. Now just getting to double digits puts you to near the top of the league. So 5 fights is quite a bit for a star player, and Simmons has done that the last 2 years. He'll probably do it again. He used to fight more. He used to be a double-digit fight guy, but as his point totals have gone up, his fights have gone down, which is very common to see in the NHL. Next, I'm going to look the captain of the Dallas Stars. This guy is another throwback, another one of my favorite players. I love this kid, Jamie Benn. He's a throwback too. I love his leadership style. He leads by example. He's never shy to drop the gloves, and he's really that old-time captain that you don't see much anymore. He's really an awesome player. He's had last 3 seasons. He has 87 points, 89 points, and 69 points. He's had 4 fights, 2 fights, and 4 fights. So he's getting in multiple scraps a year on a regular basis, and that's really cool to see. The next, I'm going to do 3 Anaheim Ducks now. Might as well just do them together. Anaheim's always one of the tougher teams in the league, and it's because of guys like this. It's because their leadership and their best players are also tough and willing to scrap. Ryan Getzlaf, Ryan Kessler, and Corey Perry. They've all been 50-plus point players for the last 3 years, except Kessler, who had 47 3 years ago, but all the rest of the years, 50-plus points. These guys are 3 legitimate star players, and they all have had multiple fights at some point. Or the only 1 fight seasons was last year for Getzlaf and 3 years ago for Perry, but it's been multiple fights all the rest of the way for them. All 3 are tough guys and willing to drop the gloves, and they are the reason Anaheim's always one of the tougher teams. Now let's see. Braden Shen used to be a Flyer. Now he's in his first season with the Blues. Shen is one of my favorite young players in the game. He's had 47 points, 59, and then 55. He's also had 2 fights, 3 fights, and 2 fights last year. Ever since he's come into the league, he's been a willing fighter. His point totals have progressively gotten better, and he's now to the point where he is easily a top 2 center and a guaranteed 50 points a season, and he's having a very good year this year. He might break the 60 mark for the first time this year. I would not be surprised. He's a really cool player, one of my favorites, and a star willing to fight. Chris Kreider in New York. Chris Kreider has been a 20-goal scorer for multiple seasons now. He's underrated when it comes to willingness to drop the gloves. He always gets in a few scraps every year, and coming out of college, I think that surprised some people, but he's a second-line player at this point. He's a 20-goal scorer, and he also fights multiple times a year. 3 years ago, he had 46 points and 3 fights. 2 years ago, he had 43 points and 2 fights, and last year he had 53 points and 2 fights. Fought Brandon Manning. I remember that. It was the day after Thanksgiving game. And this year he already has 1 fight, so he could get into that 3-4 range this season. Let's see, we've already talked about Perry. Anders Lee, another New York, this time New York Islanders. Anders Lee has become a very good goal scorer. He hit the 30-goal mark last year. Very good offensive player. He's a second-line player at this point in his career. Pretty good goal scorer. He's also willing to fight. Last 3 seasons, he's had 41, 36, and last year 52 points. His best career high for Lee. He'll probably reach 50 again this year. And He's had 1 fight, 3 fights, and 2 fights. So he has 5 fights over the last 2 years. He's willing to scrap. Nick Foligno is another throwback player. The captain in Columbus, one of their best players, also one of their most willing to fight. He's had 73, 37, and 51 points. And he's had 2 fights, 3 fights, and 3 fights. He's willing to scrap. He always stands up for his teammates and is one of the last few throwback, 80s, 90s style players left in the league. Sticking with Columbus, I'm not sure this guy is really a star anymore. He's on the downswing, at least offensively, of his career. But Brandon Dubinsky, he might be more of a third-line player at this point, but for a long time he was a top 6 forward, especially in his time in Columbus. But he's had 36, 48, and 41 points over the last 3 years. Still decent numbers. And he's had 3, 3, and 5 fights. Dubinsky's never been shied away from fighting in his career. He fought more in his Ranger days. Since becoming a Blue Jacket, he hasn't fought as much, but he's still willing to drop him. And he had 5 last year, so that's a pretty high number. Here's a big one. Milan Lucic. Now, obviously, you guys were probably waiting for that name. He used to fight a lot more. He used to be a absolute beast fight-wise. He doesn't fight as much anymore, but he's had 44, 55, and 50-point seasons each of the last 3 years, and he's had 3 fights, and 6 fights. He got back on his fighting game last year with his first year with Edmonton with 6, but the 2 years before that, only 3 each. That's very low for him. But he's still a 50-point guy, usually at least a 40-point guy, and he's still more than willing to fight, and he's still a very good fighter. Not a lot of people can square up with Lucic that are left in the NHL. All right, let's do a couple of defensemen on the list. Let's do them now. Dustin Byfuglien in Winnipeg. 45 points, 53 points, 52 points over the last 3 years. 2 fights, 1 fight, and 3 fights. Byfuglien has never been a huge fighter. He's never fought a ton, but he's always gotten in at least a couple scraps, except for 2 years ago where he only had 1. But he usually fights multiple times a year, and he is also a pretty, big point producer from the back end. And Torrey Krug, that's probably a surprising guy on this list, but Torrey Krug puts up good offensive numbers and is also very willing to fight. Not sure how much he'll fight this year, coming off a fractured jaw in the preseason, but I can still see him getting in maybe later in the year, once that jaw is all healed up, getting in 1 or 2 scraps. He's had 39 points, 44 points, and 51 points the last 3 years, and he's had 2 fights, 1 fight, and 3 fights last year. That 3 last year was a career high. He is small, but he's scrappy, and he's feisty, and he will fight if you get under his skin, so he's probably a surprise on this list, but pretty willing to go. David Backes, another Bruin. He's had a rough go of it last year and this year, but he used to fight a lot more. If you go back, 10 years, Backes' fight numbers were pretty high. He doesn't fight as much, but over the last 3 years, he's had 58 points, 45 points, 38 points, and he's had 1 fight, 3 fights, and 3 fights. So he still does scrap a little bit, but not nearly as much as he used to. Now this guy I've only used last year's stats because he just recently became a top 6 forward. Pat Maroon in Edmonton. He came into the league as a heavyweight. He was a fighter in Anaheim, and that was his role. He played it very well. He was a 4th line guy who fought a lot. But since coming to Edmonton, he last year. Well, he came 2 years ago, midway through the season. But last year was his first full year in Edmonton, and the Oilers knew what they were doing when they picked this guy up. They put him on the wing with Connor McDavid for most of last season, and he scored a career-high 42 points. He is now a legitimate top 6 forward. I think he'll easily get 40 points again this year. He'll maybe even get 50. He also, on top of his 42 points last year, had 9 fights. He doesn't have a fight yet this year, but you know that's going to change. He is very willing to drop the gloves, and he is now a legitimate top 6 forward. So good on Maroon for getting there and getting to that top 6 status last season. And finally, the last two are 2 kids. These 2 are the future of this style of play that I can see in the NHL right now. Matthew Tkachuk in Calgary. He was a rookie last year. He had 48 points in 3 fights. He's an agitator. He's also a very skilled offensive player, and he's going to carry this style of play into the future with the Calgary Flames, because he is always going to be willing to scrap, and he's always going to be a 40-point plus guy. He's probably going to be a 50, maybe even 60-plus point guy in the future. And the other one, Max Domi in Arizona. Obviously, we all know about his dad, Ty, one of the best fighters in NHL history. Domi is much more offensive, a much better player, but also willing to fight. His rookie year, he had 52 points in 4 fights. Last year, he had 38 points in 2 fights and missed significant time due to injury. So Domi is another guy who's going to carry this old school style of play into the future and be a star player that's willing to fight. So those are the 17 guys. I went through the numbers last night and pulled out as star players, meaning top 6 forwards or high point producing defensemen who are also very willing to fight and get in multiple scraps a year. If I missed anybody, it's very possible. I went through the numbers the best I could, but I definitely could have missed someone. If I missed someone that you can think of, write them in the comments. I apologize if I missed anybody, but those are guys that I could find that are top 6 forwards, or at least somewhat star players, and also willing to fight. Not as many left as there used to be in the NHL. So like, comment, share, subscribe, spread the word. We want this channel to grow. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys soon.